reality. And we've got municipal government elections coming up probably towards the end of November, though legally it has to happen before the end of January, but there are not too many people making a case for it happening once the December holiday season arrives with us, probably before that. And I was reading an article on Daily Maverick earlier today, which suggests that rather than poor leadership, dysfunctional municipal governance has to do with poor followship, and that what we need is something called courageous followship. Let's have the man who came up with those phrases and these ideas talk us through his views. Craig Bailie joins us from the Eastern Cape, founding director of the Bailie Leadership Consultancy. Hello, Craig.
Hi, John. Thank you for having me on your show, and thanks for taking the time to read the article.
Okay, right. Well, for those who don't have the time or the inclination to read the article, your thesis is?
My thesis is that while leadership remains fundamental to understanding the failure or success of any endeavor, and that includes local governance, we cannot exclude this idea of followership, which I think becomes increasingly important in a democracy. And to understand the state of local governance in South Africa, I imagine most, if not all of the listeners are aware of this idea, this reality of municipal decay. To understand this phenomenon, we need to understand the status of leadership, certainly, but again, because citizens have an opportunity to choose their leaders, we also have to give attention to followership.
Okay, but the way
so that's my thesis in short.
Yeah, but the way that is done in South Africa in practice is that these are the people that you have available to vote for, and for many reasons, there are not too many great leaders among them, so the opportunity for great followship isn't there because the only options are poor ones.
Well, John, I always tell people, and as offensive as it may be, I think it's true. In a fallen and imperfect world, our choices are always among evils, to use that strong terminology. And I think the best that any follower can do, including in this context of electing local government, is to choose the lesser evil among the options. I don't necessarily agree that South Africa doesn't have up-and-coming ethical and competent leaders, including in the civil governance or political space. But I think what needs to shift is our political allegiances. We've seen voters increasingly, or I should say registered voters, people who are registered to vote but don't necessarily use that opportunity. We've seen more and more of them over the years staying away from voting stations. And I think part of what explains that is a fear of the unknown and willingness to let go of historical political allegiances, which I think, those allegiances, especially in our country, considering its history, aren't surprising. But it does take work to shift the voter political affiliation and insistence on supporting a party that may not be performing in the country's best interest. I mean, including at local government level.
Since 1994, voting has been a racial census. There's no getting away from that, and it is inevitable given our history. But again, you're kind of asking the followers, you're asking the citizens to do the work. The counter-argument to that would be that the parties that are not being trusted, the parties that are being held at arm's length because of a particular association with that party's past, need to work harder. So the DA, that's primarily what we're talking about here, is the DA, and this is what Jordan Hill-Lewis has said he's going to do, is to rebuild trust, to bridge the trust gap that exists between voters who are no longer prepared to vote for the ANC. They're not attracted by the ethno-nationalism of the MKP or the Patriotic Alliance. They don't believe in the economic promises of the EFF, and so they stay away. The only real option in terms of a power base and getting people into office who, as a collective, have enough to change the realities on the ground is to vote the DA. And it's not Sizwe Nxumalo's responsibility to think differently about the DA. It's the DA's responsibility to make Sizwe Nxumalo think differently about them.
Yeah. John, there's no denying that leaders need to be and do better. But in my article, I don't just write about followership. I also write about developing that followership. Now, what we need to ask ourselves is whether the majority of registered voters, I also write about courageous followership, are courageous enough, firstly, to vote, and secondly, to vote differently from how they have in the past. Now, for that to happen, there has to be some sort of an intervention in the form of, I've referred specifically to civic education. So I think given the state of South Africa's education system, it shouldn't be surprising that civic education, to a large degree, has fallen by the wayside.
There's a lot of civic education in the US, and that gave us Donald Trump. So, civic education, yes.
Well, I think we need to talk about quality and quantity. What exactly is the content that's being presented across in the example you referred to, the US in the US case? And it's not good enough that government take charge or be the only stakeholder in that program. Civil society has to be involved. Business has to be involved. It's a all hands on deck process, irrespective of whether government is performing well or not.
Yeah, look, I mean, it would be good to see change, particularly if that change were positive, and maybe people do, I don't know, start. If you don't like what the ANC is doing, if you don't like the candidates that the ANC is putting forward for local government, then in large numbers join the ANC and improve the quality of the candidates, and therefore improve the quality of the governance. Perhaps that's a kind of courageous fellowship as well. Craig, thank you very much for sharing some time and thoughts with us. Craig Bailie, founding director of the Bailie Leadership Consultancy.